Welcome to Ancient History Uncoded, where myths hide secrets and the past is never silent. This is where the deep lore really shines. In the modern imagination, Ares is the apex predator of the battlefield and unstoppable engine of destruction. We picture him as the Spartan ideal, a god who wins through sheer power. But in the actual Greek texts, the god of war is frequently the loser. He isn't just defeated. He is systematically humiliated. He is wounded by mortals, outsmarted by his sister, and in one particularly embarrassing instance, stuffed into a bronze jar and left to rot for 13 months. The ancient Greeks didn't worship Ares as a hero. They viewed him as a cautionary tale. They understood something that modern interpretations often miss, that rage without strategy is a liability. In the Iliad, brute force failed. It required cunning to actually win wars. Today, we are looking at the repeated humiliations of Ares, and why the Greeks decided their own god of war was the one deity they could not respect. To understand why Ares loses so often, we have to look at what he represents compared to his half-sister, Athena. Both are war gods, but where Athena represents strategy or generalship, discipline, and the defense of the city, Ares represents the visceral, bloody chaos of the melee. He is the scream of battle, not the plan that wins it. In Hesiod's theogony, power is usually enough to establish dominance. But in the heroic epics, raw power is often portrayed as clumsy. The Greeks had a word for the kind of strength Ares possessed. Violence, force. But they valued metascunning and wisdom far more. The mythology goes to great lengths to show us that is easily manipulated. Ares is strong, yes, but he is also predictable. And because he is predictable, he can be baited, trapped, and dismantled. The writers of these myths, Homer, Apollodorus, and others, didn't just write Ares losing to show that others were strong. They wrote him losing to prove a philosophical point that bloodlust is the lowest form of warfare. The most crushing defeat Ares ever suffered didn't happen on the battlefield of Troy. It happened during a revolt by the Olod. These were two giant brothers, Otis and Ephialtes. They were sons of Poseidon, and they were prophecy-breakingly strong. The texts tell us that these brothers were growing at an alarming rate, 9 cubits wide and 9 fathoms tall, at only 9 years old. They were a threat to Olympus itself. They threatened to pile Mount Ossa on top of Mount Olympus to storm the heavens. Ares, operating on his standard setting of attack first, think never, went to stop them. He relied on the same tactic he always used, a frontal assault. It was a disaster. The Olode didn't just defeat him, they captured him alive. They bound the god of war in chains and shoved him into a bronze jarrah storage vessel, for grain or wine. This is a god who is supposed to embody the terrifying force of conflict. Yet, he was sealed away like a surplus harvest. He remained in that jar for 13 months. The Iliad mentions this in Book 5, almost as a piece of gossip. Dione tells Aphrodite about it, to comfort her, essentially saying, "Stop complaining about your wound." Ares had it much worse. During those 13 months, the god of war withered. His scream was silenced. The war machine stopped, and the most interesting part, Ares couldn't break out. Brute force failed completely against the bronze walls. He wasn't saved by Zeus striking the jar with lightning. He wasn't saved by his own strength. He was saved by a heist. The stepmother of the giants, Erebouia, eventually betrayed the brothers and told Hermes where Ares was hidden. Enter Hermes, the trickster god. He didn't fight the giants. He waited. He used stealth. He stole Ares out of the jar when the giants weren't looking. The contrast here is deliberate. Ares, the embodiment of strength, was helpless. It required cunning, stealth, and theft to save him. The Greeks are telling us that without the thief aspect of worthy intelligence, the spycraft, the warrior aspect, is just a man trapped in a jar, fading away. If the jar was humiliating because of the captivity, the events of the Iliad, Book 5, are humiliating because of the opponent. This is the Aristia of Diomedes, his moment of excellence. Diomedes is a mortal man, a powerful king, certainly, but a mortal. However, he has Athena standing behind him, and this is where we see the Athena versus Ares dynamic play out. In real time, Athena grants Diomedes the ability to distinguish gods from men. She explicitly tells him not to fight any gods, except one. She gives him the green light to attack Aphrodite. But when Ares enters the field, stripping the armor from a fallen soldier, the dynamic changes. Ares charges Diomedes. The text describes Ares thrusting his spear over the yoke of the horses, aiming for the kill. But Athena is there. She is wearing the helm of Hades, making her invisible. She reaches out, grabs Ares' spear, and shoves it upward so it flies harmlessly over Diomedes. Ares, blinded by his rage, doesn't even realize he's fighting two opponents. He sees a mortal and thinks it's an easy kill. Then Diomedes strikes, but it is Athena who drives the weapon home. She guides Diomedes' spear directly into Ares' lower belly, right where the armor belt fits. It bites deep into the flesh. The reaction of Ares is famous. Homer says he bellowed as loud as 9,000 or 10,000 men in battle. The sound was so terrifying that both the Trojan and Achaean armies stopped fighting and shook with fear. But look at what happens next. He doesn't counterattack. He doesn't go into a berserker rage to destroy Diomedes. He runs away. He flies straight to Mount Olympus, sits beside Zeus, and shows him the blood flowing from his wound. He complains. He says, "Father Zeus, are you not angry looking at these violent acts?" He tries to blame Athena, saying she is the one who is out of control. Zeus's response is the final nail in the coffin of Ares' dignity. He doesn't offer comfort. He looks at his son and says, "Do not sit beside me and whine, you double-faced liar. To me, you are the most hateful of all the gods who hold Olympus. Forever quarreling is dear to your heart, and wars and battles." Zeus confirms what the narrative has been showing us. Ares is strong, but he has no fortitude. He can dish out violence, but he cannot take it. When the brute force is turned against him, he crumbles. This brings us to the core philosophical conflict. Why did the Greeks write their war god this way? Why is he the punching bag of the pantheon? It comes down to the difference between civilized war and barbarism. Athena is the goddess of the polis, the city-state. She fights to defend civilization. She uses phalanxes, discipline, and tactics. Ares is from Thrace region, the Greeks viewed as semi-barbaric and wild. He fights for the sake of fighting. In the Greek mind, if you fight like Ares, with pure rage, you might win a skirmish, but you will lose the war. We see this again in the shield of Heracles. Ares wants to fight Heracles to avenge his son, sickness. Athena explicitly tells him to stop. She warns him that it is not fated for him to kill Heracles. Does Ares listen? No. He ignores the prophecy, ignores the strategy, and attacks. And once again, Athena intervenes. She deflects his spear, and Heracles, a semi-divine hero, stabs Ares in the thigh, knocking him into the dust. His own sons have to drag him into a chariot to save him. They knew they couldn't fight Typhon with brute force, and they knew they couldn't win the Trojan War with just anger. Ares represents the part of war that the Greeks feared in themselves, the loss of control. By humiliating Ares in their myths, they were asserting the superiority of the rational mind over the emotional impulse. Athena always wins because she never loses her temper. Ares always loses because he never keeps his. The humiliations of Ares are not accidental inconsistencies in the lore. They are the point. The Greeks created a god of war who was physically perfect but mentally flawed to teach a specific lesson. Strength without wisdom is just a target waiting to be hit. Whether he is trapped in a jar by giants, stabbed by a mortal, or scolded by his father, Ares serves as the eternal example of how not to fight. He is the god of the losers, the patron saint of tactical errors. If you want to dive deeper into the specific translations of the Iliad or the lost epics that detail these fights, make sure to subscribe and check the references in the description. In the end, the universe wasn't saved by the god who screamed the loudest. It was saved by the ones who thought the clearest. Perhaps a bit of thievery magic. Join Ancient History Uncoded and discover the past's hidden secrets.